Okay, hey everyone, welcome back. I'm so excited you're back. I'm sorry I left you guys with kind of a cliffhanger in our last video, but I was just getting so excited and there's so much material to present and I just ran out of time because, you know, YouTube only lets you place so many minutes of video. And plus, I mean, I really think it's good for you guys to have like digestible chunks so you can genuinely think about it. You know, I'm a firm believer in critically thinking about any sort of information I've ever presented with to evaluate it for its truthfulness or its falsehood. So I really think it's important that, you know, we kind of break it up into little chunks. So anyway, I left you last time where we talked about, you know, Jesus actually claiming to be God. And we established at that time that Jesus claimed to be God. Now, in this video, we're going to talk about, okay, so we know he claimed to be God, but now we have to look at, was he lying when he claimed to be God? And how do we know one way or the other, okay? Because obviously we know that just because Jesus claimed to be God doesn't necessarily mean that he was God. Now, let me pause here and let me just, for anyone who's just joining us, didn't watch my previous videos, quick recap. What I'm doing in these videos is I'm just going through a book called The Case for Christ, and it's written by Strobel, and he was an atheist who wanted to critically evaluate whether or not the claims of Christ were true or not. He really believed at that time, I don't know if I said this or not yet, but he was an atheist at the time and felt like, okay, if Jesus really walked this earth, there would be evidence. I want to find out what it was. So he went on a 2-year journey and presented the evidence in his book. And that his journey included talking to a bunch of scholars in the field, as well as looking into tons and tons and tons of book references and research and okay? And so he made it all nice and compact for us in the book, and I'm now making it even more compact for you in these videos, just digestible chunks. So anyway, like I said, just because Jesus claimed to be God doesn't necessarily mean that he was God. So obviously we know that many of us will stretch the truth if it benefits us in some way. You know, for example, someone might go into a job interview and claim they have tons of experience working with the law, or they might put that on their resume, whatever it might be. Because after all, people will lie when there's something in it for them. So the question was, you know, what's in it for Jesus? Why would he claim to be God at this moment? Christ's oldest biography describes how he was asked point blank during his trial, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" And you guys, this is so important at this point because he was not ambiguous at all. At this point, he says the first 2 words out of his mouth are, "I am." Now, let's pause here because I do not think it's coincidence, or, you know, I just think it's really cool that he uses those particular words, "I am," because throughout the entire Old Testament, God refers to himself as the great I am. You can first see it in with Moses in the book of Exodus. You guys really should go read it and check it out for yourself. But God himself refers to himself as I am. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that Jesus himself right now, after he's point blank asked, "Are you the Christ?" he says, "I am." Anyway, that's just the nerd in me coming out. I think stuff like that is so cool. But anyway, the high priest knew what Jesus was claiming at this point because he angrily told the court, "You have heard the blasphemy." Now, of course, what was blasphemous at this moment? And it was that Jesus was claiming to be God. This was the crime for which Jesus was put to death. You guys should check it out in Mark 14, verses 60 through 64. If you haven't gotten a pen and piece of paper during this video yet, go get one. All my videos, I make references that you're probably going to want to write down so you can read it for yourself. Anyway, so what did Jesus get for claiming to be God? He got tortured to death. And this is the point where if I've got any little people watching this video, any young kids, you're going to want to pause the video and go get a trusted adult, probably your parents or your guardians, and go ask them to watch this video first and see if it's appropriate for you to hear. I'm going to describe a little bit into what exactly dying on the cross looks like because obviously, like I said, Jesus was sentenced to death. Now, this is different than people getting sentenced to death today. Obviously, we know that we've got things like the electric chair where, you know, they inject something in you, whatever it might be. Or I guess they don't call it the electric chair anymore. It's just lethal injection. Anyway, so not really a lot of torture, just kind of a slow, you know, easy death. This was not what the Romans had planned. Dying on a cross was on purpose designed to be the most torturous form of death that they could come up with. But before we even got to that point, I mean, Christ was whipped with a whip that had chunks in it that could literally rip out chunks of your flesh. And he was ripped on his back with that over and over and over. And not only that, he was obviously, as we all know, was a crown of thorns was placed on his head, which pierced his skin. on his head, which, I mean, those two things alone would be excruciating. I don't think any of us could stand up under it. But then he has to get on a cross, and basically death on a cross, they take these massive nails, and they can't put them in like the flesh of your hand because that would rip your hand open. It can't support the weight of your body. So they would put it through these two bones on your wrist on both sides, and then they would take your ankles and hammer them on there as well. Now the craziest thing about being on a cross is that it's actually, you know, you'd wonder, well, what's actually killing you about just hanging there? It's actually a death by suffocation, because you can't breathe by the way your arms are hanging, and so you have to literally push yourself up on those nails that were just driven into your flesh, which obviously would be excruciating to push yourself up just to get a breath in your lungs. You know, but if you don't want the pain of pushing yourself up on your feet, well, then you can't breathe because you can't get any breath in your lungs. So then death on a cross is actually a death of suffocation, which a lot of people don't know. It's a really, really, really torturous death to have. And I think that's really critical to understand in this moment, because, you know, let's go back to that example I gave you earlier where a lot of people will lie in a job interview. And they'll lie in the job interview because they think they benefit from it. But imagine you're in that same job interview and someone is holding a gun to your head and saying, okay, you've been claiming this whole time that you have tons of experience in law. But now I'm saying I want to know what's true. Are you really experienced with law? Because if you are, you're going to die. I mean, how long at this point do you think the interviewee is going to hold on to their lie? Or are they going to be like, you know what? No, I'm sorry. I was not telling the truth. I was stretching it. I really wanted the job. That was not legit, and that's not really true. And yet, Jesus held on to his claim until the very end. So the question is, would someone willingly die for a claim he knew was a lie? And not only a death, a torturous death. I mean, goodness gracious, you guys. So Lee, back to the author of the book, Lee Strobel, decided to correspond back and forth with a man named Dr. Ben Witherington. He has a whole slew of degrees, as well as he's written several books just about the life of Jesus himself. I mean, he's just known as one of the experts in Jesus's life. So Lee wrote to him and basically said, what makes you think that Jesus was more than just a good teacher? I've heard that the idea that Jesus was more than just a teacher didn't even get started until years after his death. So Dr. Ben Witherington writes back, okay, you think so? Then why did the Roman authorities crucify Jesus? If he had merely been a teacher, and that's it, just a teacher, telling nice little parables, how did he end up on a cross? There had to be a reason why the sign above his head said, "This is the King of the Jews." Now, either Jesus made that claim or someone clearly thought he did. Now, we're going to kind of hop back. In the last video I alluded to, and I really wanted to get to, and I didn't get a chance because we ran out of time. It kind of leads us to the question, okay, well, if he wasn't just a plain teacher, what if he was just a great moral man, a great moral teacher? And a lot of people have claimed that throughout history. Maybe that's a thought you've had before. Well, let's evaluate that claim. This particular argument doesn't really stand up under scrutiny, because if you think about it, great moral teachers don't lie and say that they are God. After all, that would be counterproductive and incompatible with what they are. They're a moral teacher, and thus by definition would not believe in living a lie. But Jesus did claim he was God. So it seems with Jesus, it has to be all or nothing. Either he was this great moral teacher, in which case he wasn't lying when he said he was God, or he was lying, in which case he was not that great of a moral teacher after all. So then we're back to the question of, okay, would Jesus be willing to die for a lie? Or was he willing to die because he actually believed that he was telling the truth? According to the Gospel of Mark, Jesus told his followers that his purpose was to, quote, give his life as a ransom for many. And you can find that in Mark chapter 10, verse 45. Now, he was willing to die a horrible death, a torturous death, slow, of suffocation. Oh my gosh. And can we just hop back there for a second? I'm just imagining, I mean, literally after they'd whipped his back, it's already so raw and there's so much flesh. And you just imagine he, after that, has to push himself up on those nails that are inside his flesh, through his bones. I mean, he's scraping his back, killing his feet, yanking on his arms, trying to yank himself up on those nails again, just trying to take a breath. I mean, oh my gosh. Anyway, he was willing to die this horrible death. to pay for the sins of the world so that everyone could be made right with God. And that's what he claims, you know, and this is either the highest form of arrogance and megalomania that he's saying, you know, I'm giving my life as a ransom. Or it's the example of someone who really believes, as he said, I and the Father are one. And he really believed that he was on a divine mission to redeem the people of God, and that anyone less than God couldn't save the world. Now, we're going to jump back to Dr. Ben Witherington. I mean, here's a question that you guys, we have to critically think about. We have to examine, why is there no other first century Jew who has millions of followers today? Why isn't there a John the Baptist movement? Why, of all the first century figures, including great Roman emperors, is Jesus still worshipped today, while others have just crumbled in the dust of history? Now, at this point, you know, Lee is still evaluating, but obviously Dr. Ben Witherington, he's devoted his life to studying Christ. He says this. He says it's because this Jesus, the historical Jesus, is also the living Lord. That's why. Because he's still around while the others are long gone. Now, you might be like, wait, hold up. If you don't know much about the Christian faith, you're like, wait, you just said he died. What are you talking about? Well, after he died on the cross, 3 days later, one of the basic tenets of the Christian faith is that he raised himself up from the dead and then ascended back into heaven, where he now rules, obviously, as God, who, you know, no one else would have the power to raise himself from the dead, but we'll get to that in another video, you guys. Anyway, so obviously at this point, it became really evident to Lee Strobel that Jesus didn't just claim to be God. He actually believed it when he said it. He wasn't just kind of pulling some kind of scam to try to get ahead by claiming he's God, because how did he get ahead? He didn't. He died. He was tortured. Now, after all, you know, that, like I said, is what got him killed. No one in his right mind dies for a lie, which raises the next question, which I'm going to address in the next video. Was Jesus in his right mind? Or was he not in his right mind, which is why he was willing to make these claims that he was God, and then not only that, die for those claims. So next video, we're going to look at, was he in his right mind or not? And how do we know one way or the other? I'm really excited for that video, you guys. I hope you join in with that as well. Make sure, if you haven't yet, there's a red button right below the video that says subscribe. Make sure you subscribe to this channel so that every time I put a new update, a new video, you guys won't miss it, because I really genuinely believe that there's a lot that I have to say, and there's so many important things that, you know, you're going to want to critically evaluate for yourself and just figure out what is the truth. I really want to know the truth, because if it is true that Jesus really was God and this really happened, that's a truth that could change your life in one of the best ways. So subscribe to my videos, and I will see you next time, you guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. Bye.